Genesis chapter 20. So as I said yesterday, Genesis 20 is very similar to Genesis 12 and 13 in structure of its narrative. So from there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negeb and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "Behold, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife." In Genesis, there's some interesting different uses of referring to God. So anytime you see Lord, all in caps, what that means is that the divine name is being used. Originally, the text would have said Yahweh. All right, and then out of reverence, the divine name, because of the third commandment, the second commandment, they start to just not even write the name and write Lord as an act of reference to the divine name, but so you know that in the text that is what's being used. But here in verse 3, it says God came to Abimelech. One possible explanation for this is because Abimelech is not part of the covenantal household with Abraham, and God is speaking to him, right? That in terms of God speaking with someone outside the covenant, he's known as God. But when he's being addressed by someone within the covenantal family, within the context of that relationship, his divine name is being used in the interchange. Caleb, did you have a question?
I'd say when he came to him in a dream, he's still like showing Abraham was still fighting for him. He's still fighting besides him because he came to Pharaoh to the plea, and now he's coming to Abimelech with a dream.
Yep. So just like the last time that Abraham went down into Egypt, now Abraham's in a different region, all right, and Sarah's being taken in. But yes, God is fighting on behalf of Abraham. Jumping down to verse 6, then God said him into a dream, "Yes, I know that you've done this in the integrity of your heart, and it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her." Abimelech basically says, I didn't know she was married, so my bad. And God says, "Yeah, I know, it was a mistake." Verse 7, "Now then restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all that are yours." All right, so we get this reference again to a character in the Old Testament being a prophet. At no point in the Old Testament has Abraham been foretelling the future, okay? It's because prophet is not a fortune teller. It's someone who's the mouthpiece of God, someone who speaks the word of God, whether it's past, present, sometimes it can be related to the future as well. So Abraham and Sarah escape Abimelech, and we're going to jump down to chapter 21. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time at which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, "God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me." And she said, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would suckle children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age." The name Isaac means laughter. So when Sarah's told that she's going to have a kid, she laughs, and God calls her out for the laughter. And now Sarah is having her laugh and her joy now that she finally has a child. So in verse 8, Hagar and Ishmael are sent away. And the reason why God tells Abraham to do this is in order for Abraham to really trust in God fully, Ishmael has to go. All right. Abraham has a couple potential heirs now, Ishmael and Isaac. God has told Abraham that Isaac is the one who's going to receive the covenant and the inheritance. So now, and then we know in chapter 22, God is going to tell Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. So in order for the sacrifice of Isaac to be more meaningful and for everything to be put on the table, Abraham has to send Ishmael away. Verse 8, and the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. Now that line, playing with her son Isaac, yeah, it could also mean that he was playing roughly with the child. And Ishmael at this point, he's around 13 years old. So you got a kid who's been weaned, and the 13-year-old boy, who's the son of the maidservant slave, is now roughing up like this new young toddler. And so Sarah gets quite upset about that. Verse 10, so she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, be not displeased because of the lad and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your descendants be named. It is interesting here in Genesis, you get a break from the traditional theme, so to speak, of the man, when he listens to his wife, something goes wrong. Okay? But here God is saying, do listen to Sarah. All right, so because God's giving that directive commandment, it helps maintain the pattern of the story, so to speak. And that in this instance, God is condoning the message from the woman bending the ear of the husband. Verse 13, and I will make a nation of the son and the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down over against him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, let me not look upon the death of the child. And as she sat over against him, the child lifted up his voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Verse 22, at that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now, therefore, swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my offspring or with my posterity, but as I have dealt loyally with you, you will deal with me and with the land where you have sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. So Abimelech and Abraham are going to make a covenant together. This is the same Abimelech king that Abraham, that initially had taken Sarah, but then gave Sarah back. So Abraham stayed around. They remained as neighbors. And now Abimelech wants to make a covenant because he respects that Abraham's a prophet, right, and that there's going to be this mighty nation coming forth from him. Yes, May.
So there's a whole thing about how like the Muslims are like descendants of
Ishmael. Yeah.
And like that's the reason why they hate each other so much. Is like filial hate is the worst kind or whatever. But so why would God, like knowing all he knows, why would he make a great nation of Ishmael if he knew that like they were gonna be?
Yeah. The whole Muslims come from Ishmael. It comes from like the Quran, and it's kind of a Muslim claim, which I don't know how much weight to put in that. Muslims are Arabs, right? They come from a plentitude of ethnic backgrounds. So It's kind of like their way of tying into the Old Testament characters, because the Quran is already a confusion of like Old
Like,
Testament stories and
he knew they would.
Muslim teachings.
God knew that they would claim Ishmael as their, like, knowing what he knew. Why would he say that in the Bible, knowing that the Muslims would then claim that they're descended from Ishmael?
Ishmael does form a great nation, and I mean, knowing what God knew, why would he create Adam to eat the fruit? Like, just because someone's going to take that claim and use it as a reason to stoke hatred, like abuse of scripture happens all the time. So I think God's more concerned about being true to Abraham, right? His faithful servant, than what some lot of people are going to be making up. You know, that's on them, not on God. Yeah, Caleb.
But I mean, it also says that God was with Ishmael, and it doesn't necessarily say Ishmael ever, like, besides being being a jerk to Isaac, but he was like a bad person. Because God was with Ishmael all his life, so I think he didn't abandon him.
Yeah.
Just because he knew what side it was like. Those Ishmael's descendants that did the wrong.
Well, okay, so there is the prophecy that Ishmael is going to be an ass of a man, and that his hand is going to be raised against everyone, like throughout his whole life. But you will see actually after the death of Sarah that once Sarah dies, Abraham does bring the Ishmaelites back and give them some piece of inheritance. And there's a time where you do have a network of families of like the Israelites, the descendants of Jacob, and their cousins, the Ishmaelites, are nearby, are like living in proximity. And when Joseph is sold into slavery in Egypt, he's sold to Ishmaelites. So like they're distant cousins, descendants of Ishmael, who are traveling to Egypt because they have that Egypt connection with, the Ishmael took a wife from Egypt. But also Ishmael taking a wife from Egypt is doing the thing you're not supposed to do, which is you don't marry a pagan. Okay, so Ishmael is kind of set up for, in the story, in the narrative, right? He's set up clearly to be outside of the covenantal promise based on what's happening. But yeah, God does show mercy to Ishmael because he is Abraham's son. Abraham does dote on him. All right, verse 25. When Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water which Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, so I have not heard of it until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set 7, get the number 7 for their making of the covenant, ewe lambs. Ewe lambs are the most important lambs for the continuation of your flock. So he's setting aside the 7 of his most precious lambs. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs, which you have set apart? He said, these 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that you may be a witness for me that I dug this well. Therefore, that place was called Beersheba, because they're both of them swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. Chapter 22. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only begotten son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Underline Moriah, that's where they're going. And offer him there as a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning. He gets up immediately to go on this way. Abraham is no longer questioning God like he did before. He's following this command with perfect obedience. He saddled his donkey. Note that there's a donkey. And took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac, and he cut the wood. Underline that there's wood for the burnt offering, underline the offering, and rose and went to the place of which God had told him. Mount Moriah is a mountain in the region of Jerusalem. Okay, it's in Judea. And so the only begotten son, Isaac, is going to be traveling to Mount Moriah on a donkey. And he's also going to be carrying up the wood, which he's going to be sacrificed up to the top of this hill. So you have a ton of allegory here pointing towards the sacrifice of Christ on the cross. Verse 4, on the third day, note that there's a third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place far off. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. Now we miss this in the English translation because of the way we conjugate verbs. But what Abraham is saying in the Hebrew text is, I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and we will come again to you. So, one, Isaac is following his father obediently. And also, Abraham has some faith that even though he's being told to go sacrifice Isaac, his word is that the two of us will return from this. Abraham knows that God has promised his sons through Isaac. And even though he's being told to kill Isaac, he still has faith that God's going to fulfill that promise. As far as Abraham knows, maybe he's going to bring Isaac back to life. There'll be some kind of resurrection after the sacrifice. All right. Verse 6, Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. So make a note of that. Isaac is carrying the wood of his sacrifice up the mountain. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. He said, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God will provide himself the lamb. All right, so underline that. Here's Abraham acting as prophet. God will provide himself the lamb. So they went, both of them together. Verse 9, when they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son. Abraham is 100 years old. And he's binding up Isaac, who's like around 12, 13 at this age. Okay? 13-year-olds could definitely overpower a 100-year-old, I hope you would say. Okay? So the fact that Isaac is able to be bound, again, this is pointing towards that Isaac is being a willing victim in this sacrifice. Because if Isaac was starting to freak out or have some childhood trauma from this event, all right, he would definitely be able to knock an old man over with the vigor of his youth. But no, Isaac is bound and laid him on the altar upon the wood. Verse 10, then Abraham put forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here am I. He said, do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only begotten son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. So the way you say Yahweh provides is Yeru. All right, so they went to the mount where the Lord will provide in the land of Moriah. The land of Moriah is also in the kingdom of Salem, which is where Melchizedek reigns. And this is how you get the name Jerusalem. All right, so they went to Salem. They went to Mount Moriah. It now takes on this name of Yebru. The Lord will provide. And Salem means peace. So Yahweh will provide peace, is what the name Jerusalem means. And it's the place where the sacrifice is going to be made, right? And it's in Jerusalem, right, that God does provide peace between God and man through the reconciliation that happens from Christ's sacrifice on the cross. You can also make a note here to Psalm 76. We already took a look at Psalm 76, but it's again that place where we found that Salem and Jerusalem are the same location. Verse 15, and the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only begotten son, I will indeed bless you, and I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven and as the sands which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies, and by your descendants shall all the nations of the earth bless themselves, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose, and they went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. All right. That, verse 17, the angel is recalling to Abraham the covenant that was made back at chapter 12. So chapter 12, God talks to Abraham, tells him, I'm going to give you a name. I'm going to make you, give you land. By you the nations will bless themselves. And here the covenant is reminded to Abraham, because you obeyed me, I will make you a great name. You'll have the land. All right. Your descendants will possess the enemy of their gates. They're going to have the land. And by you, the nations will bless themselves. So these are the bookends. The story of Abraham is coming to a close. Verse 20. Now, after these things, it was told Abraham, behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor, Uz, the firstborn. Buz, his brother, Kemuel, the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazob, Pildash, Jidalf, and Bethuel. Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Moreover, his concubine, whose name was Reumah, bore Tebah, Gama, Tahash, and Maacah. Chapter 23. Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah, and Sarah died at Kiriathaba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And Abraham rose up from before his dead and said to the Hittites, I am a stranger and a sojourner among you. Give me property among you for the burying place, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. The Hittites answered, hear us, my lord, you are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our sepulchres. None of us will withhold from you his sepulchre or hinder you from burying your dead. So Abraham has a bit back and forth with the locals. They want to give him a free burial place, but he's like, no, let me actually buy it and pay for it. And so they make an agreement between each other. And let's just jump up to 17. Abraham buys a field and a cave from the Hittites, and this field and cave is referenced as it's the tomb of the patriarchs, and it's referenced a couple other times down the road in Genesis. In verse 17, so the field of Ephron in Machpelah, which was to the east of Mamre, the field with the cave, which was in it, and all the trees that were in the field throughout its whole area was made over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the Hittites, before all who went in at the gate of his city. Yes, May.
So how come Sarah lives to 127 years, but then beforehand, when they were doing all the generations and stuff, there were people living to be 470?
That's a great question. Astron? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. So there's a lot of different theories that you could say are valid theologically and trying to understand what the heck's going on with that. And so the most straightforward at face value one is that the earth is 3,000 years old, and man's longevity as sin and corruption abounded just started to continually decrease and decrease and decrease. Another theory is that numerology in the Bible, like Genesis is an oral tradition, right? As we're looking at this. And so the oral tradition is very old. And so the numbers have an actual important meaning that we don't understand what that meaning actually is. There was another theory that it's referring to months, not years. And they count cycles of the moon. And so the people, if you divide them up by just months instead of years, it puts it more so in the human lifespan. But that also has its own problems. And then there's another, my brother who's a math major pointed out that actually if you go back that many years, they're not even using the same numerical system in counting that we're used to using today. So what is the actual original numerical counting system that they're using? And what we're dealing with is a translation from what would be the original story. So the answer is, I don't know. There's a lot of different ways to slice it. Yeah, Ashron, you had your hand up next.
You said the Guild of the Cave was a tomb of the what?
Tomb of the Patriarchs. And then Caleb?
Nothing.
No, okay. All right, chapter 24. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his house, who had charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. So put your hand under my thigh. All right, that is Middle Eastern. Shake my hand, look me in the face, and swear. Okay, it sounds weird to us, but maybe there's some people who, when they see us shaking hands, they're wondering what the heck is going on. Okay, but it's an old form of making a solemn agreement between two people. And he wants no pagans in the family. That's the crisis issue. Okay, Isaac needs a wife. Please, you cannot take a wife from the Canaanites, because the Canaanites are all stinking pagans, and the pagans are continual temptations against faithfulness to the covenant. All right, and that is what the Israelites are constantly facing: is that they want to go marry these pagans, and then the pagan women say, "Hey, come to my Baal worship party with me," and they do, and then next thing you know, one of the priests is spearing someone through the chest, which happens in Numbers. Yeah, it's a pretty awesome story. But so that's why when we talk about the theme in Genesis of the man should not listen to the voice of the woman, it has to do with the Israelites must not go and take the Canaanites as their wives, because then they're going to be tempted to listen to their voice and go worship other gods. Verse 5. The servant said to him, perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. All right, Abraham told him to go to his family, to his kindred, to Nahor's descendants, to get a wife. Perhaps this woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to the land from which you came? Verse 6. Abraham said to him, see to it that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and swore to me, to your descendants I will give this land. He will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine. Only you must not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham his master and swore to him concerning this matter. Verse 10. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. All right, this is another example of the type of dynamic that Abraham has with his slaves. They're part of the family. It's not like typical slave that we think of. He just gave the slave 10 camels loaded up with gold and treasure. Okay, and the guy is not going to run away and make a living for himself with it. Verse 11, and he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well. Underline well. When you hear the word well, you should think also of wedding bells. Why? Because a well in an arid place, it's a area where there's an oasis, okay? It's a spot of fertility amongst the barren world. And so wells are an image of a wedding that is about to come. So he went out of the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time when women go out to draw water. Verse 12, and he said, O Lord God, my master Abraham, grant me success today, I beg you, and show mercy to my master Abraham. Circle that word mercy. In the Old Testament, what we're doing is we're translating the word hesed as mercy, but it has a much fuller meaning than that. It means covenantal faithfulness. So anytime you see mercy in the Old Testament, it's covenantal faithfulness, covenantal love, or mercifully following on the covenant. All right, so it's a cry not just to show mercy, but I beg you, be true to your covenant to my master Abraham. Verse 13. Behold, I'm standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let the man to whom I shall say, please let down your jar that I may drink, and who shall say, drink, and I will water your camels. Let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown covenantal faithfulness to my master. All right, so the servant is asking God for a sign. It's okay to ask God for signs. The problem is sometimes we want to ask God for a sign between two options, and God actually has a third in mind. But when it comes down to discerning, all right, this is a pious act to ask God for a revelation or direction. Verse 15, before he had done speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her water jar upon her shoulder. The maiden was very fair to look upon, a virgin whom no man had known. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, please give me a little water to drink from your jar. She said, drink, my lord. And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw for your camels also until they have done drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw, and she drew for all his camels. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. So the Rebekah, she shows up. Not only is she beautiful, but she's also virtuous and very hospitable. She goes out of her way. She doesn't even have to be asked to draw water for the guy's camels. All right, so the virtuous maiden. Verse 22, when the camels had done drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing a half shekel and 2 bracelets for her arms weighing 10 gold shekels and said, tell me whose daughter you are. Is there room in your father's house for us to lodge in? She said to him, I'm the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. She added, we have both straw and food enough and room to lodge in. The man bowed his head and worshipped the Lord and said, blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his faithfulness to the covenant and his faithfulness towards my master. As for me, the Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's kinsman. Then the man ran and told her mother's household about these things. Rebekah had a brother-in-law whose name was Laban. And Laban ran out to the man to the spring. When he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's arm, and when he heard the words of Rebekah, his sister, thus the man spoke to me, he went to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. He said, come in, O blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside? For I have prepared the house and a place for the camels. So the man came into the house, and Laban ungirded the camels and gave him straw and food for the camels and water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. The food was set before him to eat, but he said, I will not eat until I have told my errand. He said, speak on. So he said, I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become great. He has given him flocks and herds, silver and gold. men servants and maidservants, camels and donkeys. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore him a son to my master when she was old, and to him he has given all that he has. So he continues to fill them in on what's been going on to their relatives in Abraham's life up to this point. And eventually Rebekah, after speaking with her brother and her father, she does agree to go and be wed to Isaac. We're going to jump ahead to verse 62. Now Isaac had come from Beer-lahai and was dwelling in the Negeb. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field in the evening. Isaac is an awesome patriarch for a couple different reasons, but here's another great reason. This is the first example you get of like someone who's going out to meditate. He's like going out and engaging in his own evening prayer. All right, so not only did Isaac have this, awesome willing offering as a son to be foreshadowing Christ, we also read that he's going out for his prayer time. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there were camels coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she alighted from the camel. And she said to the servant, "Who is the man yonder walking in the field to meet us?" The servant said, "It is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself. All right, that signifies that she's now taken and she's a bride. And the veils that we have in our home wedding ceremonies are like a vestige from this old practice. For a modern reader, you may as well have read that, and Rebekah took out the ring to get ready to put it on Isaac's finger. It's pretty much how you would have read that as an ancient world dweller. Okay.